Well, Chief Davis, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And Chief, you certainly had a lot to tackle when you assumed the role. You came into a department struggling with morale and recruitment and with no permanent police chief for over a year. But you hit the ground running with a 100-day plan.
Right.
And now practically the 100 days are up. So what have you accomplished so far with your plan?
Well, the 100-day plan is, yes, I believe it's open February. So looking at the surveys that we did, that was very important. The community surveys, what did the community say was important to them? The officers, an internal survey, what was important to the officers, but also families of the law enforcement. And I don't think that's been done before, where you're actually looking for feedback from the families of these officers. Being a police officer is an extremely stressful and anxiety-inducing job. So to have those family members be able to talk about what their concerns are and what they would like to see from the organization, I think is very important. So now that we have that information, we have it in some raw data form. So we're going to take a look at it and again start making changes and recommendations based off that data.
What's next for you as you crunch this data on your list of priorities? What would you say the biggest challenges are the department facing right now?
I think there are multiple fronts. This is something that it's not, unfortunately, this is not a job that one thing comes at you at a time, right? It is multiple things at a time. Currently, it's the immigration and what's happening across the country. That's a big deal. Morale, recruitment is still on the top of my list of things to do. Crime strategies, looking at that. The data, how we use data within the organization. So there are multiple fronts of things that I'm looking at and that I'm prioritizing.
And I want to get on some of those topics you brought up, namely immigration, in a minute. But first, I want to understand your philosophy and what you're approaching this department with. So here's a quote from you last fall. Quote, "We're going to put Austin on the map for policing done right." You've mentioned community policing before, but what does policing done right look like to you? And how is that different than what we've previously had?
I think it's using evidence-based practices. Policing is a science. There is a science to policing. And when you can combine the sciences of policing, meaning using the data to tell us where we need to go, there are locations throughout Austin that have been historically and for decades chronically where drugs are being sold, chronically nuisance properties, all of those things. And so when you can start using evidence to address disorder and crime, that's where we're going as an organization. But also beyond that, it's problem solving. Looking at how the people that live in these areas, the people that have businesses in these areas, how we all work together to solve those problems. That's the direction we're going, is using that evidence-based practices.
Speaking of working together, the last few years, you probably well know, the community has lost a lot of faith in police officers and trust in police officers. And you sit as kind of a bridge between the police and the community. How do you balance rebuilding trust between your officers and the community?
Yeah, it's listen, I don't think those things are mutually exclusive, right? You can have police accountability and you can talk about the way we need to go as an organization and what accountability means and still support the police and still support the efforts that officers are doing. And so I think that's important. It's always about being safety, about what's safe for Austin, how do we get there? How are officers interacting with the community? Again, I talk about how rare it is for the average citizen to ever call the police. It is very rare. And so every interaction that we have with a community member is an opportunity. And so we need to look at that as an organization, that every interaction, whether it's going into the gas station, getting a drink, or taking that service call, every interaction is an opportunity for us to bridge a gap between the community. And a lot of that is just understanding where we are as a city. And so officers, again, going to community meetings, us being out there, being part of the community, that's where we start.
And on a personal note, I've read that you've had in your own life growing up with your family, maybe some positive and negative interactions with police. How has that impacted you and your approach to policing?
Yeah, I mean, growing up in the inner city of Cincinnati, again, a violent area, seeing my uncle, he was thrown down a flight of steps by police coming in to talk with him. And then I talk about that, but then also the relationship I had at my elementary school with the school resource officer and how he cared for all of us. And so when you see that, even at a young age, that that's the right way to do things. And so policing, I was always drawn to it just from that, is knowing that that was wrong and the feeling it left me, seeing that. And then the feeling this other officer of just someone that you know that you could, that you knew you could trust, and how important that was.
And I'm sorry that happened
Thank
to
you.
your uncle. And I can't even imagine. Well, and recruitment and retention for police departments, it's a challenge nationwide. Per the last Public Safety Commission meeting this month, you're down still about 320 or so officers. What's the biggest challenge y'all are experiencing right now when it comes to recruitment?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we're down probably more than that. I think it's going to be an interesting conversation when we have the data to support that. But to be down 300 officers, we have to look at where our officers are. Best practices across the country, when you want to do problem solving and you want to do the whole community policing, you need 70% of your personnel in patrol, and 30% of your personnel are in those other areas of preferred assignments, meaning your homicide, your other investigative work. Here we're kind of upside down, kind of turned around. So we need to do a better job in looking at where we may be having some work done in redundancy, and how we can get people back on patrol.
And this kind of goes hand in hand with that issue. Now let's talk about response times. Several of our viewers have expressed concern to us about slow police response times when they've called the police for stuff like burglaries and break-ins, namely on the east side. I know this has been brought up to you many a time. So how do you plan to improve response times?
Yeah, I'm concerned about that as well. I think when someone calls the police, we have a duty to respond. That's our core function, is responding to those calls for service. So one, it's looking at, again, getting more officers there, looking at the way we do off days on patrol, the way we do patrol in general. I think that's one way to look at the personnel, but getting people back into patrol, working with the communications section. The way the current system is set up, officers self-assign for certain priority calls, the lower level calls. We are changing that to make it where the dispatchers are dispatching those, and that gives some accountability to the officers. They know that these runs are holding and they're theirs, and they're their responsibility.
And in your short time here, other than the recruitment and the response times, you've inherited challenges. Like, for one, the changes on 6th Street. So the weekend before last, the city tested out reopening up 6th Street to cars Fridays and Saturday nights. Previously, since December, it was just Thursday and Sunday nights. The goal being to prevent late night crowds that can become unruly, even violent. And I saw that you were out there yourself.
Yep.
So how did that go?
Well, I've been there every weekend so far. So I think it's important to kind of see, one, the officers to see me there and how important this change is. But listen, there is not, when you look at across the country, and we can certainly talk about New Orleans and what happened there, the terrorist attack, it is hard to stop a terrorist attack when someone's the ill intents of that. But to me, the safety for pedestrians to be on the sidewalk, for us to have guardrails in place, that is safer for them, it's safer for the officers. So let's move toward that. But it's also something that's important to the city. This is not just a police-led initiative, it's a city-led initiative. And so when we're there and we're looking at the resources we need, every weekend we're finding new things and new resources that we need to, again, make pedestrians safe, make the businesses thrive. And we've gotten those resources. So I feel really good about that. And we're going to keep trying and pushing. But at the end of the day, we always have to be flexible with that plan. And that means to close if we need to close. If the crowds get to a point where it's too much, again, safety is the paramount concern. And so we need to have that flexibility right now until that infrastructure is permanently in place.
And it's about being preventative rather than reactionary.
That's right.
And to note, this was in the works before
It was.
New Orleans, but unfortunately, New Orleans, it tragically made it very top of mind.
Yes.
And then I want to talk to you about this past weekend. Local news outlets reported that ICE began targeted operations here in Austin. And you released a statement on social media with some city councilors saying in part, quote, "The Austin Police Department does not and has not in the past had a role in enforcing federal civil immigration laws." Can you elaborate on that? If ICE asked you for assistance in an operation, where would you stand?
No, that is not our role. The priority of the Austin Police Department, and I've said this, and I took this job, was to make Austin safe, and it was to create an environment where communities can thrive together, where we can look at problem solving. The role of the federal government, that's their role. It is not our role here. It will never be a priority for me. It is just something, again, as a police chief of this organization, my priority is and will always be about keeping Austin safe.
That being said, a big theme of your plan has been rebuilding trust. But how do you plan to build trust with the immigrant community here, which is substantial, given these new and expected deportation policies?
Yeah, I think it's important to be in the neighborhoods, right? And we're there, and so we have projects throughout. I think off Banda, there's a large Hispanic community there. We're working closely with that community to address some concerns of crime that they're having there. Working with the Archdiocese of Austin and some other partners to kind of build that bridge on building trust, because we know that crime is so underreported in that area. But I get it. There's a lot of fear right now, and the fear of coming forward. I understand that. But again, we're going to be in those neighborhoods, working in those neighborhoods hand in hand.
And to think all of this is happening in just your first 4 months
Right.
on the job.
Yes.
Let's talk about police response to mental health calls. What do you think is the appropriate way for police to address those type of calls? And should it be the police responding to those calls at all?
So this is the thing. Police, we are not mental health professionals. And we have, whether it's a 2-day training or a 5-day training, that does not make us mental health professionals. We need help in this area. The calls for service that we get here, the number of calls for service is kind of staggering. We get a lot of help from EMS, which I think is fantastic for the city. But those calls where there's some violence, there's someone with a weapon, we have to respond to those calls. That is our role to do. But can we do more? I think it's absolutely possible. We have to think outside the box, look at best practices across the country, and how do we address mental health, but also about the need for more bed space, the need for more of a regional space to put people, when we do find people that have mental health challenges. That's the rub, is we're finding people, we're taking them to the hospital, they may be getting charged with crimes, but then they're back out on the street, and it's just this rotation that's occurring.
So let's now talk more about you so people can understand who you are and what you hope to accomplish. So you come from outside of APD, you come from Cincinnati, you're home for decades. So what made you want to leave there and come here?
Yeah, I came here for a conference for the first time. It was a National Association of Women in Law Enforcement, and fell in love with the city. It's a fantastic city. Walking down, stayed at a hotel downtown, walked down 6th Street, loved the whole thing. Came back a few times on my own. And as I was retiring from Cincinnati, I felt like I'm young enough. I still have some ideas. I have something to give, and saw the opening, and I thought, let's go for it. And so here I am.
So how do you go about implementing all of your new ideas and change as a quote unquote outsider?
Yeah, I think first it's about relationships and building your team around you, and trusting that team. So I'm at this point, 4 months in, where it's about having people around me that I trust to get things done. And when we're looking at what our priorities are, we're doing that together and we're moving. Again, I am someone that likes ideas. And when we're in a room and we're talking about things, we can throw things out. But we're all on the same page and we're all moving in the same direction. So that's what's important, is looking at what the priorities are. And that is, to me, is always just creating a safer Austin, one that's more community engaged with its officers, and building trust. I think that is always where I'm coming from when I'm looking at new initiatives and I'm looking at the people and the team that I'm trying to build around me.
And what might you say are your most innovative strategies to tackle a city like Austin?
Well, again, I think it goes back to that evidence-based policing and looking at where we're looking at the data on where we need to be. We know the neighborhoods where crime is occurring, and certainly there are more violent crime, so we can look at where it's occurring, and then we start moving from there. Why is it occurring here? What is it about this particular building or this particular space that makes criminals comfortable in doing business here? And so when we could start tackling from that front, and then bring on our resources there, whether it's through code enforcement, whether it's through other city agencies beyond policing, that's when we'll get those big wins.
Can you talk about why the support of your dad, your parents, your family over the years is so important to you?
Yeah, I think it's, my dad passed away about 10 years. It's been 12 years now. But it's just growing up, being a dad's girl, and, there were 3 of us. He owned a drywall company, and he was getting us up early in the morning to help haul his 50-pound drywall muds up the steps. But that's the thing with him. It was just always about work, always be about the work, always be about doing the right thing and being on the right side of things. And so those type of lessons stick with you.
And what do you think he would think of you leaving Cincinnati and now having this big job here in Austin?
Oh, I think he'd be so proud. He'd be so proud.
I have no doubt of that. And finally, what do you want people to know about you outside of your uniform?
I think just that I want, I think it all kind of comes together, right? It's hard to separate the work when the job is this big, and I don't think you take this job without it really being a part of who you are as a person, right? I want the best for Austin, and I will work and I will strive for the best for Austin, always coming from a place where safety is paramount, and then how we can do that in the least harmful way to people and get things done. So I want the people to know that I'm here to work for them, with them, alongside them as we develop these plans to address the problems in Austin. And the wins, we'll share the wins and we'll share the losses. And if something doesn't work out, a program, we'll come back to the drawing board and go at it again. So I think that's what I wanted to know. But that's all wrapped up into who I am. It's about pushing. It's about striving to do something better.
That is a great aspiration for all of us in our own lives. Well, Chief Davis, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe for more from Austin Insight.
You can also watch full episodes of Austin Insight for free on the PBS app.